You're tuned into the hottest paranormal life show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Greetings, followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin. Welcome to Into the Fringe, number 29. And my guest tonight is Peter Robbins. Peter Robbins is an investigative writer, best-selling author, and lecturer, well known for his UFO-related papers, columns, articles, editorials, commentaries, and talks. Peter's writing and research are focused on the subject of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications for humanity. He is a regular fixture on talk radio and podcasts, and has appeared as a guest on and consultant to numerous television programs and documentaries. He is the host of the weekly radio show / podcast, Meanwhile Here on Earth, Monday nights from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Peter has been an advisor, consultant, and co-founder to numerous UFO festivals and conferences around the world. Peter is an associate producer of the award-winning documentary Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton, and most recently, the producer and writer of the documentary The Extraordinary Life and Suspicious Death of James Forrestal. He lives and works in the countryside just outside of Ithaca, New York. Welcome back, my friend, Peter Robbins.
Thank you, Cardinal. Good to be back.
Wonderful to have you back. And hello to Eli McInnes. And I would like to dive right in. First of all, where can we see Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton?
It's streaming on Amazon and IMDb. And Cardinal, I'm still getting a network echo.
I'm assured it will go away. And I wanted to take a moment to show folks where they can see that. Looks like I started watching it. Can you tell us a little bit about how this came to be and what your involvement was?
My friend Jennifer Stein is a documentary filmmaker. And about 10 years ago, I introduced her to Travis while we were all in Roswell. And they agreed that she would make a documentary about his events, and worked on it for the next 5 years. And it's a terrific documentary.
It looks like it. Looks like it very much. Peter, I know you'd like to discuss and give some capsule reviews to some recent UFO books you'd like to the viewers to know about. So let's dig in right away. You can go ahead and tell us about the first one, and I will put the cover up on the screen. The first one being the one by Shane Hurd.
Oh yes, it's a what?
Unidentified
Please,
aerial
if there's
phenomena.
something you can do about this echo, it's very difficult to speak over myself. It's a full voice. 1 second.
Okay.
Hello.
How's that?
Still there.
How's that?
Same difference. Do you hear it all?
I do, on your end.
Well, put up the book cover and I'll try to. This is really hard.
I will do so.
Well, waiting for the cover. Shane Heard, a UFO researcher and investigator based in Arizona, earlier this year published a book which I thought was absolutely terrific in its own quiet way. It is what it notes there in the subtitle, A Beginner's Guide to Researching UFOs. Many folks, of course, are interested in it. A lot of them watch the show, but wouldn't know really where to begin to research them. And Shane is old school. He has a lot of very quality training. His writing is superb. It's so efficient and so well written that anybody with really no background in an investigation of any sort could begin to do the work. And it's certainly not just a book for beginners. As somebody that has done UFO investigations on and off for decades, it was even a little humbling for me because it reminded me of so many basic things and things that are not so basic that I had kind of forgotten about, or just back burner, so to say. Highly recommended, a great addition to any UFO library.
Good. And let's talk about the alien agendas, a speculative analysis of those visiting Earth.
Yeah, let's get that up on the screen. Probably very well known to any of your viewers who are serious students of the subject. There really is no higher visibility name than Richard Dolan these last years. He is a brilliant writer, a great researcher with a background as an historian, and has written book after book about this subject based in extremely high quality research, I think, and very sharp deductive thinking. This book that came out earlier this year departs from the format that he's followed for an awfully long time, in that he openly speculates on the nature of these intelligences, different intelligences, be they from other physical worlds, universes, galaxies, or other dimensions. And I guess the thing that makes this book different than another book built on speculation is it's built on so much informed speculation. I found a lot of thinking really courageous in the way that he uses his mind, the things that he puts forward, which may or may not be actually the way it is, but it encourages the reader to think a lot, and not just one fact, another fact, like that. Again, I would say that Richard Dolan's first two books, UFOs and the National Security State, parts 1 and 2. Part 3 probably out in printed form in the next year or so. Are essential parts of any serious UFO library. But this is one that I would add as well. I enjoyed it from beginning to end.
Yes, he's a very good writer and historically accurate in everything that he's done. And next on the list, I think, was Making Contact, Preparing for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence.
Yeah. This is a book that was edited by an old friend of mine in New York, Alan Steinfeld, very active in the UFO research and paranormal community in the city. What Alan has done here is, along with his own essay, has brought together a number of individuals, many extremely well known in the work, like Whitley Strieber, Linda Moulton Howe, Nick Pope, with people who are not as well known, giving different points of view on how society needs to begin to change and shift in order to accommodate this truly paradigm, to use an overused word, paradigm shifting period of time that will come whenever it is that we reach a tipping point in the general population in terms of disclosure.
I wanted to ask you quickly, Peter, do you have your speakers on?
Say again?
Do you have your speakers on?
No, I'm just listening through my headset.
Do you have a YouTube window open as well as StreamYard?
I don't think so, but let me check. No.
And your computer settings are likewise as your hardware, correct?
My computer settings are
the same as your hardware setup, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So you have your software set in your settings for headphones, have your speakers set to off, and obviously your webcam and microphone are on.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to say about Alan Steinfeld's book?
No, just that it's a really unique take on the subject, and maybe most important, it gives a wide variety of views, ideas, opinions on the time that we're in and the time that we're coming into. And I think his greatest contribution, again, is bringing all these voices together in one volume.
Very good. The next one on your list is UFO Contacts in Brazil. And I'll bring that up. And I'll let you pronounce his name because I'll murder it.
Yes. Thiago Luis Tikachi is one of the leading voices, not just in Brazilian UFO studies, but in South and Central American UFO studies. He's the author of about a dozen books, this one being the first to come out in English. We met some years back when hello?
Yeah,
it just disappeared. When I spoke at a conference in southern Brazil and became fast friends. He was a guest on my show. I guess, 2 months ago or so. And in a way, no matter how well informed we are about events in the United States, those of us that follow this subject as seriously as we do, historically, there has been kind of a glass wall at the Rio Grande. Information on cases, with noteworthy exceptions here and there, coming in from Mexico, Central America, South America, kind of hit the wall and slide off and float away in the Rio Grande. And I'm only half joking. It's amazing how ignorant most of us who consider ourselves well informed about UFO activity in the United States are so woefully poorly informed about activity south of the border. And make no mistake about it, some of the case material that comes up, brilliantly researched, confirmed, scientifically verified, multiply witnessed, is jaw-dropping. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. There is no better introduction that I'm aware of, certainly to UFO activity in Brazil in the English language, than Thiago's brilliant compendium here. He's a very good writer, and it translates, I think, very well into English. Again, I can't compare it to the original Portuguese, but it's a highly readable book. The cases are very detailed, and I found them fascinating, and some of them really chilling. Brazil is a huge country with as many regions, allegorically as we have here, and different views, but the activity there is acknowledged publicly much more comfortably by the government historically, by the military, and it's a unique volume. I wish that every country south of the border had an equivalent volume to introduce us to UFO contacts in Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, Peru, etc. down the line. We don't that I'm aware of, but this book stands on its own, and highly recommended.
And these are all new books that you would recommend to our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many people in the last years have simply become accustomed to getting their information on whatever subject interests them from the internet. And as we all know, the internet is miraculous, but it's a double-edged sword. There is so much crap mixed in with quality databases. And if you're kind of a lazy reader, or you're looking for, wow, that's a very cool piece of video, that's such a sensational UFO, look deeper. Is there the name of a real individual who shot it? Are there witnesses to it? Are times given when it happened? Is there any kind of scientific verification, or maybe more important, in the case of visual materials online, of any kind of photo analysis? The answer to those questions is usually no. Where a book that stands the test of time, that's been researched, that has a bibliography, that has actual sources, is much more valuable in the long run. Again, I'm old school. I love books. I love reading. And I've been building a library consciously since I was a teenager. And my UFO library is invaluable to me as a writer, but also as a reader, and also to fact check or to compare notes on. If you have, the desire, you're going to write an article or something and submit it for publication. If you have access to a number of good quality UFO books, you can often verify what you're writing about, or essentially be better informed. And in this field, anybody can say anything. And with exceptions, they can also say, you can't prove me wrong. You can't prove that I didn't go on board a UFO or that it didn't land on my lawn or.
Similar to the teapot orbiting the Earth theory. You can't prove there isn't one.
Yeah. And so it's incumbent on anybody that wants to make a case for an event, a sighting, to be able to build it on as solid ground as you can. And if you're relying just on internet sources, it ain't going to happen.
In the chat, our friend Mr. MH has a question about the Gurupiranga human mutilation case in Brazil. Are you familiar with that?
Vaguely, not enough to speak about it in detail, but I've read about it too. I don't know how verified the verification is. In the history of abduction studies in the United States, people are taken and returned. If there are exceptions to it, they're rare. And I'm not aware of any that are fully verified. That case seems to involve somebody who was taken, died, one way or another, their body found in an awful state. And that's the report on that. More than that, I can't responsibly say. I'm one of those people who, like anybody, I can have an opinion on anything. But if my opinion isn't informed by real information or isn't well informed enough for me to speak about it with confidence, I will actually choose to not have an opinion, certainly not have a public opinion, until I learn more about it and can speak about it somewhat intelligently and with some background knowledge. That doesn't stop a lot of people from having opinions in our culture. And,
right.
They're entitled to it. But sometimes it's better to not have a public opinion than to have an uninformed opinion.
And Peter, that's why we have you on the show. I only have guests on that are vetted and I know are the real deal. And you are, in my opinion, if you don't mind my saying so, the epitome of that. So,
thank you, sir.
Let's spend some time on the release of the Pentagon's UFO report. What are your thoughts and opinions about it?
Right. I'm guessing pretty much everybody in our audience is aware of this report, at least in the abstract, if they haven't actually read it. For months, we were told that working group through the Pentagon would be releasing a report on the subject. And it comes at a time where more and more people who were never publicly interested in the subject have expressed an interest, I think in part because the climate has changed. Since late 2017, the ridicule factor has diminished a great deal. People in public life are more willing to talk about it, talk about their opinions of it or what they think about it, knowing that they're not risking what they might have 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, in bringing down all holy hell on their reputation and being seen as some kind of crackpot. To cut to the chase, though, the report didn't tell us much. It parroted what we already knew that they said they know, and for many of us, it's just very staged. It could be the Russians, it could be the Chinese, maybe it's even us in a program that's so black that we, releasing this report, are completely unaware of it. And then at the farthest end, who knows? And almost making, not mocking, but gosh, we guess there's a chance it could be, in so many words, other intelligences from parts unknown. in advanced technology under intelligent control for reasons we're not aware of. For
That's
me,
what I got out of it too.
yeah, we know also that the report that went out to the general public was highly redacted, edited, and sanitized, which means, of course, that the real report, the full report that went out to members of Congress, presidential cabinet members, key people in the Pentagon, the military industrial establishment, key people around the world who need to be in the know in the opinion of the people that issued the report, probably is more substantial, more interesting, more detailed, perhaps contains factual material that it is felt that we, the people, are not yet ready for or not entitled to. One can only make educated guesses about the attitudes of the secret keepers and those who act in their behalf. I think it's fair to say that the report will certainly not be isolated, that there will be other reports coming at us if the people that move the chess pieces around can stretch it out. It would go on for years and years and years, maybe each one staged to suggest, well, here's a little more information that we've come into contact with or that we are now cleared to share with you, and stretch it out as long as humanly possible. You can bet hard cash that one thing that will never come up in any future reports any more than it did in this one, unless somehow the hand is forced, will be anything really exotic, that there have been crashes, there have been recoveries of this technology, there has been back engineering, that certain aspects of modern age technology are rooted in what we learned from taking apart their stuff. There'll be nothing about UFO abductions or any other subject that springs from the UFO abduction subject. It's, I think, all goes back to this idea of it's a matter of national security, a fear of mass panic. That is one of the standing excuses since the 1940s. And for some people, this may be a very solid point. For others, not so much. But I think we've discussed this in the past, that even in the 40s, there were references to the reactions of Americans all over the country listening to the October 30th, 1938 broadcast of the Mercury Theater of the Air. I think it was on NBC, Orson Welles' repertory radio company, of the Americanized version of War of the Worlds. And a lot of people were caught up in it, did believe Howard Fass's wonderful radio play. It was much more innocent times. People were anxious in that we were literally at the edge of World War II. And the mind is very suggestible, again, especially without so much of the modern high-tech dramas that we've been subjected to in the world of entertainment over the decades we've been alive. And it still strikes me as amazing that so many people, when the show would cut to commercial, and if the Martians were busy destroying New Jersey and other places, and this was supposedly a broadcast in the moment, although it was collapsed weeks into one broadcast, that they would probably not be breaking for commercials. They'd be running for their lives, in the manner that certain people on the west side of New York ran to the Hudson River to try to see flames coming in the distance from New Jersey. I think that catchphrase, it's a matter of national security, is almost better understood or more honest if we say national insecurity. And that's not we the people's insecurity, but the people historically controlling the information. and who don't want to lose the grip of it, who don't want to be seen for what they are, as completely impotent and unable to affect the situation now any more than they were 74 years ago in 1947.
Yeah, and to speak to both of those points, I think when the unclassified Pentagon report was released and it was 9 pages, and the classified report was released and it was 90 some pages, there's obviously something that they are you know, uh, being forthright with the American people about. And as to the Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater Company broadcast of War of the Worlds, I don't know if it was the Rand Corporation or another body, but the government asked someone to do a study, and they quoted that and said that there would be mass panic based on that radio broadcast. But I don't think a lot of people know that there was a very famous singer that was on that night and maybe on a variety show, and most people had tuned into that. And then after that part of programming was over, they switched over to the channel of the Mercury Radio Theater Company, and they didn't hear that this is our Halloween version of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Well, that came at the very end, but you're absolutely right. To enter that program, once it had started, without hearing that it was the Mercury Theater of the Air. And every week they did as I recall, a different radio play, which was very popular entertainment at the time. And it was a great company with quite a number of voice actors who went on to important film careers, certainly Wells himself. And to say, again, that it was redacted to 9 out of 10 pages is ridiculous. It reminds me, though, that first it was the Rand Corporation. That study dated from 1960. The Rand Corporation was started by the Air Force as a think tank, but by 1960 they were also doing projects for corporations and think tanks of other types, as well as
the
contractors.
Intelligence community.
Yeah, and that was a conclusion of theirs, that there was potential for mass panic. Again, 1960, like 1938, very different times, less sophisticated audiences for sure. In February, as I recall, of 1948, a scant half year, if that, about that, after Roswell and Kenneth Arnold, the Air Force published its very first serious investigation of the UFO phenomena, which, like the classified version of our recent report, went out on a need-to-know basis. The Air Force itself at that time was less than half a year old. Before September of 1948, it was still the Army Air Corps. And this was a very important report. Many years later, it was fully declassified, and we can now read it. However, at the same time as it went out, a sanitized version of maybe 7 pages as opposed to 40 pages or so went out to the media. And if there's anything humorous to find there, sometimes the names, the grandiose names, or the patriotic names, or the symbolic names that various projects and reports are given can, come back to bite you. In this case,
like Project Grudge.
That's it. Project Sign, the sanitized version, was named Project Grudge, which certainly expressed the attitude, I'm sure, of those people who wanted the secrets to be kept or the information, be kept to a minimum that the public was allowed to see. And if there was ever a report that expressed more attitude than that one, I don't know what it was.
I wanted to mention really quickly, the Stream Elements bot is running, but the Stream Elements tip jar is not. So if for any reason you should wish to tip me, buy me a coffee, send me $1 or $2, you may do so at this link. It's 100% secure. I don't get any of your credit card information, etc. So thanks in advance to anybody that would like to support this kind of programming on YouTube. And I also wanted to mention that we have a giveaway at the end of the show. And Peter, if you don't mind, I'm going to make myself big here so that I can show the DVD that you wrote and produced and narrated about James Forrestal. And of course, it's hand inscribed, which I certainly appreciate, and I'm sure everyone else will. It's a great documentary. I really like it. I can't speak highly enough of it. And you must be present in the chat to win. So make sure to stay to the end of the show for that giveaway. Okay. Next question. There seems to be a rift in the UFO research community about the nature of the report and the ongoing debate over whether they are good or bad. Are these actually the right questions to be asking in the first place?
I don't think so. I think, first of all, being human beings, our nature is to be concerned and wary of the unknown. If there's a more emblematic subject than intelligences behind truly anomalous UFOs, to emblemize anxiety, I think that's it. First, that's based on an assumption that there's only one they. And I can't prove it, but more than 40 years in the field and study, speaking all over the world about it, researching it actively for decade after decade, my conclusion, based on a lot of experience, trying to keep an open and objective mind, deductive reasoning, critical thinking, is that we're probably dealing with a myriad of thems. Whether or not, again, they're three-dimensional and corporeal, so to say, and in hard metal advanced pieces of technology from out there somewhere, or interdimensional phenomena, as written about in depth by pioneer UFO researcher, investigator, and I would say philosopher, Dr. Jacques Vallée. I think that there's a potential that there's many kinds of thems as there are us, and that those thems may have very differing opinions about humanity, relationships with humanity, and attitudes toward their relationship with us, in part based in our very troubling relationship with our planet. And you can take that any way that you want. If there is a bigger enemy to the life as we know it on this planet than us, I'm damned if I know what it is. The Blue Oyster Cult, great heavy metal band, used to have a song called I Am the One You Warned Me Of. And for those old enough to remember the absolutely brilliant daily cartoon of Walt Kelly's Pogo, maybe one of the most thoughtful cartoons in the history of cartooning.
I remember Pogo.
Yeah, it was a daily when we were kids in papers. You can find anthologies of it and use bookstores. It's smart as a whip, and it was very courageous to go off on a tangent for a moment in that much of it was written during the McCarthy era. And Walt Kelly had a lot of courage to attack this ideologue and do it vaguely disguised, but the character that was uh, McCarthy was clear as a bell. But in maybe the most famous frame in the history of Pogo, talking to another character, and I think the quote is, "We has met the enemy, and they is us."
Mhm.
And it's not far-fetched, I think, to imagine that for some of these other intelligences that have come and gone, possibly since time immemorial from our planet, who have their own relationship with our planet for reasons we can only guess at. Maybe it's halfway between here and there. Maybe they've always been here. Maybe. But if they have any concern for what is going on here in terms of climate change, global warming, and human beings' contribution to it, they have a right to be concerned, the same way that those of us have a right to be concerned who care about such things. And there may be ones who, regarding human beings, don't think much of us to be kind. Other ones who really are kind of the welcome the Space Brothers model, who do want to see us evolve spiritually as well as in other realms, and do want us to become good shepherds of our home here and do what we can to turn things around and check the damage that who knows if it's even too late to check at this point. But
It
again, to
almost
call them,
seems like it would have to be an outside intervention to turn things around in time, uh, because the corporations, untethered and unregulated as they are, will just continue without intervention.
well, you bring up a very important point there, Cardinal. I think that that's part of the dream, the longing, the hope of a respectable portion of the UFO community, so to say. Um, Even Carl Jung in the 50s, in his book Flying Saucers, I think the subtitle is A Myth of Things Seen in Modern Times, where he concludes two things: so that they are some kind of projection of a human race looking for a new pantheon of gods to save us from ourselves, and that they're probably real as, exotic machines under intelligent control. Um, but the that longing for some force in the universe, some intelligence, some group of beings to come along and save us or help us to save ourselves is perfectly natural. Um, it forms the basis of kind of a whole new pantheon of myth and legend and lore and belief, in some cases bordering on a new age religion, if not already that. And at the same time, boy, I hope so too. That would be great if some group of them came down and, started to figure this out and correct the damage. And, if you want to take it to a deeper level, address the behavior of corporations, be just a wonderful thing to happen. But it isn't happening, not that we're aware of. And so for me, it's a reminder that we, every one of us, from the most ineffectual individual who's, if they're not doing something overtly positive to help the planet, to at least stop doing things that hurt it. Act locally, think globally. recycling, composting, being nice to each other, not going out of your way to harm somebody, that's all helps. But without the real powers in the world getting behind it, the Chinese still have a lot of coal that they'd like to use before.
One plant coming online each week.
This isn't helping the situation, even when they say by such and such a year we'll be carbon neutral. We may all be living in gas mask by that point or well before it. Those of us that are left. Yeah, exactly. And that desire, perfectly understandable desire, that has been part of culture in what are termed third world countries, who in movies, in news, in popular culture see America as this place where people have stuff and get to do things they can't even dream about. And okay, we've got our shot at it now. In a few years, I may be able to own my own car. And damned if anybody's going to take that dream away from me. And so what if it's not electric? I won't be polluting much. Anyway, everybody in the United States has been doing it for 100 years plus. So what's a little bit more now or less? But I want my share of that dream. And you're not going to take it away from me. When I get to the point that you're at, and I have your stuff, even in microcosm, well, then I'll start to be responsible and think about the earth. Things don't look good in that respect for where we're going.
It's definitely the first world's responsibility to fix what the first world has done. And I agree. I don't see runaway capitalism regulating itself. And I often think to myself, the way they treat this planet, you'd think they have another one to go to. And recently I've been thinking to myself, I wonder if they do. Because where are their grandchildren going to live,
I think it's such a brutal thought, but I think at that level of the game, so many of these people that wield this kind of power, that have personal fortunes running into the billions of dollars, and, own companies or are active in multinational activities.
Let me guess. Narcissistic personalities.
Well, not even that, as much as they just don't care what happens to their grandchildren. It's, I love you in, that nice pat on the head, you're my grandkid kind of thing, but I'm concerned with what's going on for the rest of my life. Even though I go to church or synagogue or the mosque or whatever, I don't know about this afterlife stuff. I know what's going on here. I want to have a good time. I want to have a lot of stuff. I want to have power, and screw the rest of the world. I think that attitude is very prevalent among many of the most powerful people in the world. And if anything, that's going to be part of what sinks us as a species, that they just don't care. And no matter how much decent people everywhere who do want to leave a potential for life of some quality after they're gone, who actually care what life on earth is about once they're gone, don't have the ability to impact the way that corporations driven by this raw desire for more power and more stuff and a bigger market share. The biggest problem that it comes down to, and it's something that, will immediately bring people down on you to some degree in the extreme, is population. I remember when I was a kid growing up, and like in junior high school, and learning that there were almost 1 billion people on the planet. There had never been that many before, and it had expanded a huge amount over the last 100 years. And now there's like 9 billion or something? We have bred ourselves into a sense of insanity. And for most people, the poorest people, the people who have the least power in the world, that's one thing that they can keep doing, is make more people, with the idea that's millennium old of, some of my kids will live and there'll be somebody there to take care of me when I'm really old. It's this ancient fear, desire, and what do you do about it? Procreation has either been mystified or mechanized, and to even talk about that there are too many people on the earth, any of the possible suggestions, are one step away from being a Nazi. I have no answers for it. I'm just pointing it out. And without the overpopulation we're experiencing now, we probably would not be facing the climate crisis we're facing now. One's connected directly to the other.
I agree. I remember, I think it was Texaco in 1974 or 73 did a study to find out what the effect would be on the atmosphere of their products. And they didn't reveal that study, but it got out, fairly recently. And their timeline was right on the money. We had a question about your documentary, James Forrestal, His Extraordinary Life and Suspicious Death. Is it region free?
Yes, it is. And it has word for word English subtitles and a very fine Spanish translation track as well. I'm very proud of both of those things.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And to have one autographed by the author, producer, writer is certainly a wonderful thing.
We are still some distance from getting it streaming on a platform, but sooner or later it will. In the meantime, if any of your viewers are interested in buying a copy, it's $15 plus postage. It runs 1 hour, and you can go to On Wings, ONWINGES Productions, which is the company of my executive producer, and it gives ordering information there, specifically directly from me at this point.
Very good. And I will share that so people can get an idea. So there is the Travis documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And there is your
There you go.
documentary
And
here.
click on that. It also has a long trailer there.
Yeah. Which I would play, but I might get a strike on my page. So,
what do you mean?
I'm wary of playing audio because I might get a copyright strike. YouTube is really lashed out.
Well, the trailer belongs to myself and the production company, and it's on YouTube, but it doesn't belong to them any more than the DVD does. So you can play it if you want.
They have an algorithm where bots go out and seek materials that don't belong to the person that streamed it.
Okay.
So people can get it here. And of course, if you wanted to, you would be able to share your screen and play it, and then it would be fine.
Yeah. Can I share screen with the format that I have right here?
If you go down to the bottom, in the middle it says share,
It sure does.
and you can click that and it'll say share screen, and then you can put the trailer there and play it. Just make sure that you hit the little box that says sound.
Okay. It's not allowing me. That allow box
I'll
is.
stop sharing mine. Maybe that'll help. You need to start a new window in your browser, and then go to the trailer there, and then share that screen, and make sure to hit the box that says sound, sort of to the bottom left.
Do you see my white screen here?
No.
Okay. Well, you know, I am a total non-computer guy, so I'm not sure what to do
Took me a
here.
while too. I tell you what, I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll play it. And if I get a copyright notice, I'll just excise it and edit it out later.
Very good.
One moment. We will share the screen and the audio. And I think this is what got us into trouble before. So we may have to mute. Don't know why it's doing that. Go. Now I don't remember if I ticked the sound button or not.
In my 40-plus years in UFO studies, one individual personal story has stuck in my mind since I was first introduced to it in 1987. It's the story of the life, the rise, the extraordinary accomplishments, and the death, and circumstances surrounding the same, of our first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. And growing up in the time I did, I became a passionate amateur historian of post-war America. James Forrestal was a true patriot. He served his country with great devotion, and most folks don't know who he was. Most people in America, if they've ever heard his name, it has to do with the fact that an aircraft carrier was named after him, a campus on Princeton. If you work in the intelligence community, there is a medal, the Forrestal Award. There's a bust of James Forrestal in the rotunda of the Pentagon, but he's been lost to history. And as time passed, that bothered me more and more, especially because he gave his life for his country as much as any soldier that had fallen in battle. And so I began years ago to simply collect information on him, going through out-of-print memoirs by individuals that knew him, newspaper articles, documents, reports, FBI files, and then would set it aside and work on something else. Several years ago, it kind of came to a head for me, and I thought this is a story that needed to be told, and needed to be told in a way that was extremely pragmatic and well documented. There's a tremendous amount of myth, legend, lore surrounding Forrestal's life and death, some of which may well be true. I put that all aside and worked with a model of material I could present in a court of law. I ended up writing an hour-long script and working with my associate producers Jennifer Stein and Bob Terrio. We created, I won't even call it a documentary. It's very modest in its undertaking, but it tells the story in a way that I hope Americans will never forget. I think the most important part for me is that we not only remember this man, but we look to him as a role model of true service. I hope you'll enjoy this documentary, but I also hope you'll learn something from it. And if you come away feeling as I do, that you'll share that with other people. Americans need to know who their fallen hero was and the circumstances surrounding his extraordinary life and very suspicious death.
A wonderful trailer and a wonderful documentary. And it's of particular interest to those in the UFO community because it's my understanding that he was made Secretary of Defense, the first Secretary of Defense, kind of whip fast. And when he was maybe read into the programs about UFOs and what's going on, that his demeanor changed from the sort of stoic, fearless soldier type that he was used to, and there was so much concern that they took him and put him in the Bethesda Naval Mental Hospital. Would that be correct, Peter?
In part, he had a profound nervous breakdown, which certainly, to my way of thinking, was influenced in part by being overwhelmed by what he faced as the second most powerful man in the world at that time, and his inability to do anything about it. And a character aspect of Forrestal was that he personalized his victories and failures personally and professionally. And this drove him into a terrible state of depression. And once he had this breakdown, they were right to be concerned. And he was institutionalized at the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. And the rest is history, as we say.
And if we can go back to our discussion about the release of the UAP, Pentagon / DoD materials, it seems like the UFO or UAP abductees and experiencers have been sidelined in this debate. What do you make of this debate, and where do you think they fit into the present moment in growing public interest in the UFO subject?
Well, you're absolutely right. Again, the divide in the UFO research community, in part, as you noted, are they good? Are they bad? There are people that have already villainized Louis Elizondo for, well, he's a military guy. He's an intelligence guy. He worked for the government. How can we trust him? And if they're going to take a point of view, of course, it's going to be the defensive point of view and thinking strategically. And, of course, coming up with new weapons and defense systems and rationales of why we need to defend against them. We're at the extreme other end are folks who are saying, but they're good. And this is just the military and governments and the worst part of humanity's way of not allowing them to assist us as we long to be assisted. The reality is that, once again, we're probably dealing with ones that mean us well and ones that may not. And people on both sides, I see, are tending to get in each other's faces about it and make the other group of thinkers wrong, even to the point of, all these people that claim to have had negative experiences. They're all folks who either have their own mental problems that they brought to the experience, or that they were the victims of military abductions, which are in great part created to give the aliens a bad rap, which I think kind of over dramatizes the situation and is not strictly true. I have no idea. It's not a research specialty of mine. But experiencers and abductees have been completely left out of this dialogue to a great degree, in part because the last thing that the secret keepers want to bring attention to are people that allege they've had contact experiences, people who allege that they've been
may very
taken.
well be part of the classified Pentagon briefing that Congress got, correct?
I'm going to take an educated guess that no, that there's not a word in there about abductions or about, again, anything very exotic. Maybe there's more detail. Well, there would be, of course, a lot more detail on the reality of, we have these radar returns, we have these physical traces. Here are some case histories that can't be dismissed. But I would doubt strongly, and I may be wrong, that certainly at this early point in this new phase of fake openness on a certain level, they've lost control of the dialogue, and they can't go back to convincing the public at large that it's swamp gas or reflections from the ground or strange meteorological condition.
Temperature inversions, etc. Yeah.
All these things exist, but they don't wash as far as truly anomalous UAPs, UFOs go. I think all we can do is give these people who are legitimate experiencers and abductees an opportunity more than ever to speak out on the reality of their experiences and their opinions about them and their impressions of them. It's a subject I have continued to come back to repeatedly in my radio show. Started with it, returned to it every few episodes in one way or another. We'll do that this coming Monday, because I don't think there's a more important subject for the general public to really begin to wrap its head around than the reality of experiences of their fellow human beings, and not just these exotic machines and are they from here or someplace else. Very compelling subject and one we need to keep our attention on, and that there is very important work being done on. But to shunt aside the human beings without whom we wouldn't even be pursuing this in a way um, is wrong in every sense.
And another question, when it comes to UFOs and the abduction phenomenon, what are the origins of the UFO ridicule factor? There seems
Well,
to be a
first,
blackout on the UFO subject on the national level. And are some parts of the government, in your opinion, threatening the media or working with them? How did this all begin?
well, first let me go to a question here, and it's a good question from Canadian Spider-Man. Human eyewitness testimony isn't worth very much at all, however. It is the lowest form of legal evidence for a reason and is often dismissed due to its unreliability. That's why it's not included. The fact is that we're not talking about eyewitness testimony as much as human experience, which has, in many cases, uh, physiological aspects that could be brought into a court of law, family histories. Also, eyewitness testimony backed up by experiences, backed up by other witnesses, credible witnesses, is often the kind of thing that does convict people of serious crimes. So it, I appreciate that question and the thought behind it. We all need to maintain rational skepticism in this work. Nobody more than somebody in my position. If I'm caught believing something that can't be substantiated, my reputation appropriately takes a serious hit, and boy, oh boy, has it in the past. But to dismiss human accounts, and again, often what's not brought up is the physiological evidence, the history within families, the scarifications on people, the mark sometimes shared, the same mark in the same place by a parent and a child, and sometimes 3 generations, the actual reality of implants, some of which have been removed and laboratory analyzed, that were not put there by any human agency. The fact that where they are under the skin never shows any indication of how it was inserted. There's never a scar. So this is such an uncomfortable subject, this aspect of UFO studies, that I get why people will go to that argument. But when you look at the information, the data collected and documented by a number of outstanding investigators, writers, researchers over the decades, you really do have to consider it. But talking about ridicule is a very powerful force. Nobody wants to be made fun of or to be made to look silly or to be singled out as some kind of eccentric or believer. And up until recently, ridicule has probably been the most powerful tool in keeping people with some power and with a voice in the public realm, as well as your average person, quiet about it. And it all kicked in the summer of 1947. There was a brilliantly engineered assault on even considering any exotic reasoning behind the UFO phenomena by major media, whether or not it was tacitly driven by offices and agencies within government certainly makes sense. But what we do know for a fact is it didn't even last the summer I mean, it went on all summer and continues to go on to a lesser degree up to the present. But that did begin to recede in late 2017. Things did begin to change then. But even by the end of June, the average American had already been conditioned to understand that it could be this, it could be that, it might be this. It could be war jitters. You know, we're about to enter a whole new phase of political anxiety history. We beat the fascists in Europe and, you know, the fanatics in Japan, but now we've got the Soviets to contend with and communism. And that's in the air. The beginning of the Cold War, the official beginning of the Cold War, by the accounts of many historians, starts in the summer of 1947. And I consider that a coincidence, but a really interesting one, because that, of course, is the beginning of the modern age of UFO sightings and phenomena. And by the end of that summer, by the end of June of 1947, the American public had been brilliantly conditioned to understand that if you think any of this flying saucer stuff is, you know, little green men from Mars, you're foolish, you're silly, you're deluded, you have an imagination, you're, you know, you're a quirky lost person. And in fact, great Wilhelm Reich had a wonderful phrase that is so appropriate here: evasion of the obvious. This was the one thing it couldn't possibly be. It could have been mass hallucinations. It could have been war jitters. It could have been, you know, secret tests by the Russians. It could have been us messing around with V-2 rockets over areas where they shouldn't have been. And the suggestibility of the human mind. It came down to an incredibly insulting assault on human intelligence. One of my favorites was, quote unquote, Brownian movement on the eyeball. You know, it's some kind of reflexology on the surface of the eye. You look up and you think you see a fully articulated disc. Give me an effing break. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous, and it would be funny.
Oh, and Peter, don't forget, you can fucking curse on my channel as much as you want.
Fucking great. But again, let's look at how counterintuitive that kind of thinking is. If we then lived in a world that in that area of thinking was relatively sane. Let's say you and I are neighbors and it's the summer of 1947, run into you on the street one day and say, you know, Cardinal, how you doing? I had the strangest thing happen yesterday afternoon or last week. I was playing with the kids in the yard or mowing the lawn, or we had a barbecue. We were out standing in the yard at night, and we looked up, or I looked up, and I saw this thing or things. And it or they were no bigger than stars, but they were zigzagging. It was a fully articulated disc. It was oval. It stopped and started. It did stuff that no planes can do. It just defied every law that, you know, a layperson like me understands about flight. And I never saw anything like it in my life. And I wonder what it was. Now, in a sane and reasonable world that summer, I'm going to make an educated guess and say that you probably thought or might have responded to me, gee, that's interesting, Peter. I wonder what it was too. End of story, right? Except that by the end of that summer, Americans were conditioned, if they heard somebody say something like that, to think, what's wrong with this person? Are they mental? For some reason, do they want to fool me? Are they a hoaxer? Do they think, you know, are they so lonely they need this kind of attention? Do they think they're going to make money taking this ridiculous attitude? Were they drinking? And never giving a serious thought to just maybe. It was a machine of undetermined origin and advanced technology under intelligent control from parts unknown. End of story.
And, you know, I've been having Albert Rosales on uh, every second Thursday of the month. And we're going through his books of humanoid encounters. And once you start getting into that database, it's like you say, there's no going back. And I wanted to ask you, it's been 10 years since Budd Hopkins' passing. What can you tell us in a nutshell about how your work with him informed your research other than your own experience?
Well, my experience basically was a life-changing UFO sighting when I was a kid, growing up on Long Island, New York, with one of my sisters, and then repressing that memory for many years. And when it came up, uh, not only having my sister confirm that memory, but then going on to articulate conscious memories that had never left her, that we would now regard as archetypical abduction-related memories. Within a year of that, I met Budd Hopkins, who had just published his very first article on a UFO case. And it was a very well-written article. I was very taken aback by it. We had in common the fact that we were both artists and painters. I, at the time, teaching at my alma mater, the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. He, a fairly well-known gallery artist. And this 5 years before his first book was published, Missing Time, a very important book in the world of UFO studies and specifically in abduction research. And we began to build a friendship, and it really revolved around art, the lives we were living in New York City, which we loved, and this UFO phenomena. And in 1981, that book was published and brought immediate attention to him in the world of serious UFO studies. In 87, his smash international bestseller, Intruders, was published. In 96, Witness, the true story of Brooklyn Bridge UFO abductions, was published. Then a few years after that, I forget how long, Sight Unseen, which he published with his then wife, Carol Rainey, and his last book, published in 2008, a brilliant, unique, fascinating from beginning to end American memoir called Art, Life, and UFOs. We were friends for 35 years, and for a good part of that time, I worked as his assistant, initially as his art studio assistant, and then helping with the work that he became so well known for in the world of UFO abduction studies. All of Budd's work remains incredibly relevant, and I'm very glad to report that his two first books, essential, I think, to any serious UFO library, both of which have been out of print for many years, as of a few short months ago, are now back in print, and you can get them. And if you don't have them, get them. They are available from a wonderful small press in London called August Night Press. But if you type in, Budd Hopkins Intruders or Budd Hopkins Missing Time, I'm sure you can find them on Amazon and lots of other sources. But August Night Press is the publisher of record. This Saturday, specifically, the 21st, will mark 10 years since Budd's death. And like the passing of anybody in your life who really was important to you, be it a relative or a friend, husband, wife, lover, whatever, these are things that we measure our lives by. And I will never forget that day. And I'll be marking it personally with friends, with colleagues, on Monday, this coming Monday, the 23rd, on Meanwhile Here on Earth, with various people who were colleagues of Budd's, who he worked with in terms of their experiences, or were friends who knew and loved him. And we will be spending our 2 hours reflecting back on the extraordinary life of a great man and a great guy, and one of the more important contributors to what we now know and understand about the most complex, I think, challenging area of UFO studies, namely that regarding the UFO abduction phenomenon.
Yeah, it's somehow unreal to me that it's been 10 years since we lost Budd, and his work is certainly very important and should never be dismissed, and he'll be remembered fondly for a long, long time to come.
I agree.
Peter, let's talk about the UN and UFOs.
Well, it would be wonderful if we had something contemporary to talk about regarding the UN and UFOs. But going back a bunch of years, we do know, and it's on the record and accessible, that in 1978, the United Nations, the special political committee, a special political committee of the General Assembly, held a series of meetings regarding the very simple proposal that the United Nations establish a UFO study group. That simple. That they begin to collect information, each country, and offer to share it with other countries, and begin to learn about this subject that had been so castigated and, so dismissed in the media. One of the things that's most wonderful about the effort, which it wasn't successful, although very few people would be surprised to hear that, is that it did not begin with the efforts of a diplomat or politicians or people working deep within the United Nations. It began with an extraordinary effort by a young guy from Queens, New York, named Lee Spiegel, who was fascinated by the subject and managed to connect with the prime minister of this small Caribbean island nation of Grenada. Spiegel, in his 20s, probably early 20s, knew that the prime minister had had a UFO sighting and had written or published around it, and also took the paranormal seriously. And he prevailed on him as a private citizen of another country to bring it to the floor of the UN, which he did a number of times, and it was either tabled or dismissed. But finally, in 1978, that motion passed. And there was this historic series of meetings. And invited to speak at the meetings to the delegates who were willing to be there. And you'd be surprised how many chose not to be there, using the fact that there had been a blizzard in the last few days and that they couldn't get from their cushy apartments, probably 5 minutes away, to the General Assembly. Stanton T. Friedman, Dr. Jacques Vallée, Dr. Alan Hynek, a Lieutenant Colonel Coyne, who had been caught up very recently in a very well-documented helicopter UFO incident where the copter that he was in, I don't think he was piloting it, he may have been, encountered a fully articulated UFO, and the controls were set to dive and get the hell out of there. And it was pulled up 1,800 feet against its will. Gordon Cooper, the well-known astronaut who took the subject very seriously, was scheduled to speak there during those meetings. Unfortunately, his flight, I think it was out of Dallas, somewhere in Texas, I think, was canceled because of the terrible conditions on the ground in New York. And the motion to set up a study committee somehow passed. and then was allowed to die in committee. And to the best of my knowledge, since then, the UN, certainly as far as we're concerned, has made no real effort to reinvigorate this subject. Again, if it has, it certainly hasn't made the papers or hasn't become a subject in UFO studies. But there was that moment where it almost happened. And I should say I was there. It was my first real major experience of UFO event relative to something historic. I had actually had the honor of working on helping to edit a requested paper by my first mentor, a military scientist and a retired Hungarian army staff officer who had been in charge of photo reconnaissance for the Hungarian military during World War II, who the then Secretary General had asked to write a report about. In great part, the report revolved around the idea, still a very important and serious one, that if a genuine unknown came into the airspace of, say, the United States or the Soviet Union and failed to identify itself and was misidentified as an enemy bomber, it might trigger a retaliatory bomber, and that we might, if everything went completely wrong, be plunged into a nuclear war because of this misinterpretation. But I was in the gallery, and it was really very moving to me as well. I was probably not 3 years into my obsession with the subject. Both of my parents were interested enough, both working in New York City and living in New York City, to take the afternoon off and join me there. And so the three of us went to hear this debate, speakers at the UN. And it was another 10 years before I really connected with Stanton T. Friedman, who went on to become a mentor to me, among a number of other noteworthy people, Budd included, and a good friend and a dear colleague. And of course, we lost Stan something over 2 years ago.
He was the first lecturer that I put on here in town.
Good choice.
Yeah, Stan is the man. That's how we talk about him. Peter, people have been throwing around the topic of disclosure a lot lately. What are some of the roadblocks on the path to disclosure?
Well, I guess the entrenched attitude that's been there since 1947 of institutions, governmental institutions, not looking for everybody to take the subject seriously. It was Friedman, in fact, who was the first person to point out, that I'm aware, that one of the reasons that nations might not want the world to come together and say, oh my gosh, this UFO, UAP phenomena is real, and we're not alone, and there are other intelligences out there, and maybe we should begin to use that to see ourselves somewhat differently in the great pantheon of things, that while we are Americans or Canadians or Indians or Brazilians or Mexicans or Israelis or whatever, and while we are conservatives or progressives, men, women, different religions, different skin colors, we're human beings first. And that idea of being of a groundswell of major populations actually beginning to think of themselves first as human beings and second as whatever nationality there are, could be a real problem for those who encourage nationalism, that you've got to be patriotic. Your country's the best country. And if another country looks at you cross-eyed or crosses that line without our permission, they're the enemy and we've got to kill them or at least subdue them. and we can't trust these ones because they're this way, and I can't trust these ones. If that whole idea of nationalism were, a rug that was pulled out, and again, people started to think of themselves first as people and not even
As
necessarily men or women,
earthlings, in
that's
fact.
a real danger to those who want to maintain the status quo, who want to maintain the power structures, who don't want people to start to get all, kumbaya on each other's ass and say, oh, I'm a person first, and, the heck with the fact that I'm an American or a Russian or this. We all need to come together and help the world. It sounds kind of corny and, hippie-ish and welcome the Space Brothers.
Well, I mean,
But
this
damn,
is a worldwide phenomenon that's going on. It's not limited to the United States. And I think you're right. If we all saw ourselves as earthlings, yeah, it would rattle some cages up there.
yeah. But disclosure with the capital D, it's happening whether anybody wants to try to stop it or not. It's like an organic process at this point. And one of the people we can thank most for that is my friend and colleague, Stephen Bassett in Washington, D.C. As many of you know,
Who was on
Stephen,
Into the Fringe just a few weeks ago.
there you go. One of the most articulate, intelligent, passionate, dedicated people in the whole history of the field. Forget about just now. And Steve has spent a huge amount of time and energy, more than anybody that I know,
And money.
in, in growing, in encouraging, in helping individuals around the world come together in small groups to become a bigger group, not to, march on the government and demand that they change their attitudes, but to help educate each other and educate other people and expand that base. And in that sense, I don't know if there's a country in the world right now, there may be, where some aspect of disclosure is not going on. And you can't stop that. The same way that the American government can't go back to saying it's swamp gas, folks. We are more sophisticated than that now. And we won't stand for being insulted at that level ever again. It's happening. I think I wish that more and more UFO researchers, the name ufologist has become quite tarnished over the last years. It's sort of a dirty word for some people, but for people who are that, who spend a good part of their life studying, disseminating information on, to not so much think of themselves as personalities or, well, choose your word, rather than educators, and just keep doing their best, not to sensationalize, but to put out clear information in whatever form they can, and keep reaching out to try to make contact with the widest audience you can. One of the reasons I decided to go into broadcasting is that it was a natural extension of more than 40 years of working in communications in this field. And over more recent years, being more and more compelled to think about there's always going to be an audience among the initiated for people like me. Preaching to the choir is the phrase, and for good reason. And that audience is always there, and it's growing. But how do people like me reach a wider audience? And I thought a radio program with a format that cuts away at the intimidation or that sort of insider idea that if you want to watch my show, you're going to be hearing all these cool people who are famous for some of us, but you have no idea who they are. So why not give them an opportunity for another kind of interview? And most of the interviews on my show are full of revelations, in that whether or not you have followed this person's work for decades or you're completely new to the subject, what their focus is going to be telling you the story of their lives in 2 hours. And that puts you at a very different point at the end of an interview. If you thought you knew them, you now realize that you really didn't. And they are all the more hopefully worthy of your respect and attention. And gee, I do want to get that new book by them. If you're completely new to the subject, isn't that a better way to start to feel comfortable with the work and with your involvement in it? Again, for me, abduction, experiencers, abductees are central. And I will keep coming back to those themes for however long I work in broadcasting. But I certainly want to give all of the people that I've respected in this work, and people who are up and coming, and the next generation of people already making contributions to the work, an opportunity for people to get to know them as well. So in my own small way, that's the main tool that I'm using right now to reach a wider audience, and in my own way to contribute to this disclosure process.
I'd like to briefly touch on some of your lectures. And because we're getting kind of short on time, I'll let you pick ones that you'd like to just briefly give us a capsule review of. Comets, Cults, and Fundamentalist Thinking, a UFO-related cautionary tale. Little Green Men and the New York Times, how America's greatest newspaper helped perpetrate our government's greatest deception. Critical Thinking, Deductive Reasoning, and Ufology. UFO and Alien Imagery in Advertising, Innocent Sales Device, or Calculated Social Engineering. Budd Hopkins, Pioneer Abduction Researcher and Appreciation.
Well, you give me enough there to...
Any of those.
Yeah. Comets, cults, and what's the third word that I use there? The cautionary tale.
Fundamentalist thinking.
Yeah, has to do with cult thinking, which is extremely dangerous, whatever the context, and take people back to the later 1990s when there was a cult called Heaven's Gate. Some of you may vaguely remember them, or not so vaguely, in that in 1997, their leader, a man named Marshall Applewhite, a very creepy individual, who had been in the cult business, so to say, since the 60s. And in the 90s was going by the name of Doe. He and his partner, who had passed away previous to that, went by the name of Bo and Pete. But he organized a cult, a UFO-related cult, to influence, as is always the case, lost people looking for some identity, looking for a leader to tell them what to do. It's always the same sad story, that if they put themselves in his hand, they would find, everything they're looking for, an eternity in, a wonderful situation. And at about that time in 97, there was a very important comet, not Kohoutek.
Hale-Bopp.
Hale-Bopp, exactly. That many of us, watched in amazement. I had never seen it. It really was. It really was. But Applewhite had told his followers, and there were more than 40 active ones that lived together in a communal house in California, that hidden in the tail of the comet was a mothership, and that this was the time for them all to get ready to, in his very chilling, dispassionate terminology, drop their bodies and join with the beings on board and I guess go to their home planet and, live in peace forever. Um, and they all killed themselves at his wishes, more than 40 of them. And it goes on from there. But the book that I had co-written had just come out. And one of the words in it was Eastgate. And the name of the cult was Heaven's Gate. And it drew some very unwanted press attention. And I also met Applewhite in February, I believe, of 1997. He attended a UFO conference, asked me and my co-author to sign a copy of the book, was with an acolyte who did the same thing. And I think within a week, they had committed mass suicide.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I took the subject very seriously and wrote up this paper on it. At the other end, kind of, not that it's funny, but there are some aspects to it that would make you smile. I think a lot of people who have an interest in the subject, especially going back to when media, a big part of media was print magazines. Now, they're the ones that are left are an endangered species, as we all know. And every once in a while, especially, 70s, 80s, 90s especially, there were ads, and there still are occasionally, with a theme regarding some aspect of UFOs or aliens. It could be a little mom and pop ad in a local paper. It could be
Ashtar Command. They had little ads.
I'm talking about completely non-UFO related publications.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, everything from your local newspaper to Newsweek, and in some cases the ads were very sophisticated. It's all pre-computer generation, beautifully illustrated. Major multinational corporations. Some of the ads suggesting back engineering, abduction, various real aspects of UFO studies. And like a lot of people, if I'd see an ad like that, I'd just clip it and put it into a file. And that file got bigger and bigger. And some years ago, certainly at least a dozen years ago, I thought maybe there's some way to turn this into an interesting presentation around, is there something behind this? Is this part of some programming, of the forces that be to make us all more aware of the UFO phenomena? Or it's kind of random because people stop if they see an ad like that, even if it's to laugh at it. And, they may or may not buy the product. Madison Avenue is very clever like that. And so
maybe in a climatization process?
Yeah, exactly. If that were the case, and it's just not, random. And I started to reach out to colleagues both here and abroad. And it turned out quite a lot of them did the same thing I did. And I said, could you scan the ones that you have? And so I started to collect ones from out of the country. And then I did what I do. It's a creative project. I laid them all out, grouped them according to theme, put them in chronological order, looked at it like that. The kind of publications they were appearing in, whether or not the copy was silly or serious to some degree, and then started to make my notes and put it together in the form of a lecture. And I think originally, it shows how far back it goes, it was a slide lecture. And I've more recently transposed it and updated it to PowerPoint, of course. And I draw certain conclusions that I wouldn't have even thought about had I not just had the idea to do it, as that's, one of the things that drives me. The Budd Hopkins talk you mentioned, part of my healing process, having lost a very dear friend, as well as a very close colleague, as well as a mentor, I'm a writer. And sometimes writing is really literal. You excise, you get it out. And
It's
so,
cathartic.
yeah, exactly. I wrote a number of monographs, papers, just my memories of him, and then thought people should know these things about him to some degree and put them into the form of articles, and found some publications that wanted to publish them. I had done a photo essay of Budd's home and studio and Budd about a year before he died. So, along with many other pictures I had collected over the years, I was able to put together a pretty meaningful series of illustrations for the published versions of these, and then put together a talk about an hour long, very well illustrated, of my memories, in part of Budd. And it's something that I might put online this week for obvious reasons.
It still is just mind blowing to me that he's been gone for that long.
Mhm.
He had such an important impact on not only abduction but ufology, if we can use that word seriously, and certainly you are most qualified, I think, to speak about him knowledgeably. Uh, is there a website or somewhere that people can go to learn more about the Budd Hopkins Foundation?
Well, the Intruders Foundation essentially, um, a number of us attempted to keep it going, but as certain organizations are, it was the Intruders Foundation, dedicated to educating people to the reality of abductions, to having a program whereby we had speakers brought to New York a number of times a year, to put on several conferences, most important, outreach to people that had had experiences and needed to connect with other people that would take them seriously. And if they were in the greater New York area, to interface with them in person or invite them to be part of a support group. But as much as it was the Intruders Foundation, it was Budd Hopkins Intruders Foundation. It was not a cult of personality, but it was personality driven. And without Budd, we kind of lost our rudder. And, even a year later, trying to reorganize it and reach people in the old mailing list, we just really weren't able to get it together. The other thing is that so much of the material we generated was analog. There was a website, but after Budd passed, it really wasn't maintained to any great degree beyond a symbolic aspect. So there really is no central database to go to, I'm sorry to say. He was an incredibly prolific writer. And for the books that he wrote, which are well known and hopefully will always be available, he wrote dozens and dozens and dozens of articles and conference papers, reviews, criticisms, special reports, analyses. They just kept coming out. But again, most of them were printed out and not part of an online presence.
And to your knowledge, they haven't been collected anywhere.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Maybe a future project for some daring researcher or investigator. I don't know.
That would be very valuable. You're right.
So we're about to do the giveaway of your DVD, The Remarkable Life and Suspicious Death of America's First Secretary of Defense, an early casualty of the UFO cover-up, James Forrestal. But I wanted to ask you, where can people find out more about you online, and can you plug your show on KGRA and any other website other than the ones that we've already touched on for your documentaries?
Yeah. Well, again, Meanwhile Here on Earth, which is my main communication venue these days, is on KGRA from 7 to 9 Eastern Standard Time. And be aware of the following. KGRA has been doing a lot of reorganizing, and it was needed. They must generate more income to stay in business. And all of us who are hosts on shows want to support them in doing this. Up until now, and running, I think, through or until August 28th, there has been a very generous backdoor whereby, even though they are a subscription-driven radio station, you've been able to, if you know where, to see all of their shows at no cost, simply by going to YouTube and typing in KGRA DB, Digital Broadcasting, and in some cases just typing in the name of the show. Mine, again, Meanwhile Here on Earth. And if you do that, every show that I've recorded since I've been doing it, which is less than a year, but that's over 30 shows, will come up and you can watch them at no cost. And I hope you will, because after August 28th, what will happen is you can watch a show live as it's starting, or go to YouTube and do the same thing, and you will only get half an hour into it. After that, if you want to watch future shows or access shows that are already recorded in podcast form, you need to subscribe. And I can really use the assistance of anybody in your audience that wants to support KGRA and indirectly, in a very modest way, support me. I am one of those people who really is trying, after more than 40 years in this work, to be able to partly support myself doing this. As you know, it's very dodgy business. And for every person that subscribes using my subscriber code, they get 30% off the monthly, and I think even a little bit more on the yearly subscription cost. I'm biased, of course, but I think it's a really good show, and I hope you'll consider subscribing to it. If you do, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but for every person that subscribes to KGRA and uses the subscription code Peter, I know it's pretty exotic, how did they hit on that? I will receive $1 a month for each person subscribing under that code. Now, a year from now, if I have 18 subscribers, I'm not sure what I'll do with that $18. If I have 800 or 1,000, you will be able to help me pay my bills and keep doing what I think I do well. So again, if you want to get a sense of these shows, go to YouTube, KGRA, Meanwhile Here on Earth, and watch your brains out until August 28th. After that time, subscribe. I have a website. It's so horrifically out of date right now that I'm not even going to give you the URL for it. I will tell you that I am in early stages of building a platform presence, and I want to make sure that it has enough content by the time I open it up to the public that it will be worth your while to visit it, and with knowing also that there will be new content coming in every week. It will branch out into a lot of subjects. It will, of course, continue to focus on the UFO subject. I'm very excited about it. Again, it's in the earliest stages, but that ultimately will be my biggest online presence, more than any website could be. And again, my KGRA presence will keep going. Otherwise, I promote every show I'm going to be on and whatever's going on with me, as well as other things that I think of interest that have nothing to do with the subject, being a cat maniac. You will see cat pictures on my Facebook page.
Oh, people love that.
Exactly as they should. And again, for me, I have a lot of interests in life. I have colleagues who play it very close to the vest and will only allow their specialty subject to inform their public presence. Sorry, I'm a film maniac too. If there's something that interests me, I'll let you know about it. I continue to try to weed out so-called Facebook friends who friendship was, given 8 years ago, and they don't write, they don't call, they don't anything. So I hover at about 5,000, which is the maximum, and keep trying to make room for new Facebook friends and welcome any of you folks who are interested.
Super awesome. Let's go ahead and do our giveaway. Peter, I'd like you to think of a number between 1 and 10, and we're going to use the Price is Right system. People can guess a number, and whoever goes closest without going over will win a copy, autographed, I understand, of your DVD. So, folks in the chat, put a number between 1 and 10 in, and let's get this giveaway going. Everybody in the audience, pick a number between 1 and 10 and put it into the chat now, please. Darius Munchausen has number 4. Don McDouglas has number 3. Get those numbers in, folks. Michael Pilmer has number 7. I'm going to call 30 seconds. Get those numbers in. Ten seconds. Put a number in between 1 and 10 in the chat for the giveaway. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Peter, what was your number?
Well, it was 6, but I think in future, when you do this with guests, you should ask them to turn off their comments page and not mention the numbers that people are saying, because it puts your guests in kind of a quirky place.
You mean that they might be able to psychically guess what you're thinking?
Well, I know what they're thinking, and it's not the way raffles work as a rule. You reach in and you take a number.
Yeah.
Anyway, 6.
We actually do have a spinner that my co-host, Mexican Iron Man, otherwise known as Mexican Alien Man, puts together, but he's unavailable this evening, so I apologize about that. So 6 was your number, and that means that the person who is closest without going over was Darius Munchausen. So congratulations. And I will make sure to get his information to you so that you can send that out.
Very good. Will do.
Thanks very much again, Peter, for appearing on Into the Fringe. It's been wonderful having you back. And of course, we look forward to having you again soon.
Be well, everybody.
And we will see you next time. Cardinal Sin